At exactly 7:12 on a Tuesday morning, I stood at the coffee shop counter with a paper cup in my hand. Still warm, still untouched. The total on the screen read $2.89. It was the kind of small, ordinary purchase no one thinks twice about. The cashier offered a polite smile as she tapped the screen and waited. Then came the soft beep. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice careful, almost apologetic. "It says your card was declined." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. I frowned slightly, more confused than concerned. "That's odd," I replied. "Could you try it again?" She nodded and ran the card once more. Another pause. Another beep. Declined. Behind me, I felt the subtle shift in the room. A young man waiting in line adjusted his weight from one foot to the other. Somewhere farther back, a woman exhaled loudly enough to make sure everyone heard it. The moment stretched, thin and uncomfortable. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a second card, forcing a small, reassuring smile. This one should work. It didn't. The second beep sounded louder than the first, even though I knew it wasn't. The cashier's expression changed, not judgmental, just sympathetic. That almost made it worse. "I'm really sorry," she said quietly. I could feel the heat rising up the back of my neck, spreading across my face. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the $2.89. It was something else entirely. Something far more familiar. That quiet, invisible shift when people begin to wonder. When strangers start asking themselves if you're confused, if you've forgotten something, if you're no longer quite capable. I swallowed, steadying my voice. "It's all right," I said. "I'll come back another time." I set the cup down gently on the counter, as if the gesture itself could preserve some dignity, then turned and walked out into the cool spring air. Outside, the morning carried on exactly as it always did. Cars passed. People crossed the street. Nothing had changed. Except it had. I stood beside my car for a moment, the chill of the air settling into my skin, then reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I already knew who I needed to call. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Dad." My cards were declined. There was a pause on the other end, not long, but long enough to feel deliberate. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh that carries decision, not surprise. Yeah," he said. "We canceled them." For a moment, the words didn't register. They hung there, disconnected from meaning. "You what?" "We canceled your credit cards." My grip tightened around the phone. I could hear my own breathing. Steady, but heavier than it should have been. "Why would you do that?" His voice remained calm, measured, almost rehearsed. "Dad, you're 70. You've been forgetting things lately. We thought it was time to simplify your finances." "I haven't forgotten anything." Before he could respond, another voice entered the call. Not quiet, not hesitant. My daughter-in-law. She didn't bother lowering her voice. "I told you he'd be upset." Then she took the phone. "Hi, Harold." She let out a short laugh, dismissive, as if this were all mildly inconvenient, but ultimately obvious. "If you need money, just ask us before you spend anything." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat implicated ver there. Ver they. Ver there. Ver there. Ver there. Ver. I stared through the windshield at the steady flow of people entering the coffee shop, carrying laptops, gym bags, briefcases. Their mornings were unfolding exactly as expected. Mine had quietly slipped into something else entirely. I could have argued. I could have raised my voice, demanded explanations, insisted on being heard. Instead, I said 4 simple words. "I understand. Thank you." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said. Then, I ended the call. I didn't drive home. Instead, I turned the key and pulled out onto the road, heading straight toward the bank. I didn't drive home. Instead, I went straight to the bank. I had lived in the same Ohio town for more than 3 decades. 36 years, to be exact. Long enough for routines to settle into something solid. Long enough for people to recognize your face before you even spoke. When my wife, Linda, and I bought our small brick ranch back in 1988, interest rates were high, but we didn't think much about it. We believed in paying what we owed, building something steady, something that would last. And for a long time, it had. We raised our son in that house. Birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, anniversaries, every milestone seemed to pass through those walls. Even now, years later, I could still picture each moment clearly. Linda had been gone for 4 years. Pancreatic cancer. Some mornings, I still caught myself reaching across the bed before remembering the space beside me was empty. Grief doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. It softens, quiets, but it never truly leaves. After I retired from civil engineering, I settled into a rhythm that made the days feel grounded. Tuesday mornings were my favorite. Coffee, the local paper, maybe a stop at the bank if I needed cash. Sometimes lunch with an old coworker. Nothing extraordinary, just simple, predictable peace. Or at least, it had been. My son, Brian, lived about 20 minutes away with his wife, Melissa, and my 2 grandchildren. I loved those kids more than anything. Brian called every Sunday, without fail. Melissa handled most of the holiday gatherings. From the outside, we looked like a close family. Maybe we even believed we were. About 8 months earlier, Brian had suggested helping me modernize my finances. I could still remember him sitting at my kitchen table, setting up my new phone. "Dad," he'd said, tapping the screen, "everything's online now." I admitted I wasn't particularly fond of technology. He offered to take care of it. Before I knew it, he'd connected my bank account to online access, set up automatic bill payments, installed apps, updated passwords, adjusted security settings. "It'll protect you from scams," he explained. Melissa had agreed immediately. There are so many seniors getting taken advantage of. At the time, it sounded reasonable. Sensible even. I trusted them. After all, he was my son. The bank manager, Susan Reynolds, had known me for nearly 15 years. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, she looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Harold." "I hope so," I replied. Something in my voice must have caught her attention. Her expression shifted almost instantly. "Everything all right?" "I don't think it is." 5 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in her office. She pulled up my account on her computer, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. At first, everything seemed routine. Then she paused. Her expression changed. She stopped typing, looked at the screen, then back at me. "Mr. Walker," she said slowly. "What is it?" She hesitated just long enough to make the silence feel heavy. "I'm seeing several recent changes." "What kind of changes?" She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. "The mailing address on your account was updated yesterday." I leaned forward. It wasn't my address. It was Brian's. Something tightened in my chest. Susan continued carefully. "The primary phone number was also changed." Again, not mine. Brian's. "And the email address?" "Melissa's." I stared at the screen, not blinking, not speaking, just trying to make sense of what I was looking at. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon. I wasn't here yesterday." "I know." She clicked through another section. "I'm also seeing that replacement cards were issued." My head lifted. "What replacement cards?" "The new cards sent out after the previous ones were canceled." For a moment, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, subtle but unmistakable. I never requested new cards. Susan folded her hands, her tone still calm, but more deliberate now. Did you authorize these changes? No. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she reached for the phone on her desk. Could you ask Kevin from Fraud Services to come down? Her voice stayed steady. Mine didn't. Fraud? We just want to understand what's happened. 10 minutes later, Kevin walked in carrying a tablet. He introduced himself with a polite nod before taking a seat. His questions were straightforward. Have you lost your identification? No. Have you given anyone permission to manage your banking? My son helped me set up online access. Does he have your passwords? I hesitated. I suppose he does. Kevin exchanged a brief glance with Susan. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet, professional look between two people who had seen situations like this before. He scrolled through additional records on his tablet. There are authorization forms attached to your account. I haven't signed anything recently. They appear to grant administrative access to another individual. My heartbeat didn't speed up. If anything, it slowed. That strange stillness that comes when something becomes too large to process all at once. Kevin enlarged one of the documents and turned the screen toward me. There are electronic signatures. I looked at it. My name, Harold Walker, written exactly the way I always signed it. Only I hadn't signed it. Not this. Not ever. I lifted my eyes. Can signatures be copied? Kevin answered carefully. That's one possibility. Susan leaned forward slightly. Mr. Walker, before we make any assumptions, we'd like to review every change made to your account over the past several months. Several months? She nodded. Sometimes situations like this don't happen all at once. Kevin added quietly, almost as if finishing the thought. They happen one small step at a time. For the first time that morning, I stopped thinking about the coffee. It had never really been about $2.89. That tiny transaction had simply exposed the first visible crack in something much larger, something that had been forming quietly, patiently, for months. And sitting there in that office, staring at a screen that no longer seemed to belong to me, I realized something that unsettled me more than anything else. I had no idea how much of my life had already been moved to the other side of that crack. For the first time that morning, I stopped thinking about the coffee. It had never really been about $2.89. That small, ordinary purchase had simply exposed the first visible crack in something much larger. Something that had been building quietly, piece by piece, long before I ever noticed it. And suddenly, I couldn't stop wondering how much of my life had already shifted without me realizing. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry. Anger has a kind of heat to it. It pushes you toward action, toward confrontation. It demands a response. What I felt was different. Colder, quieter, harder to name. It was disbelief. I sat alone in my living room, the television flickering silently across the walls. The sound was muted, but the shifting light filled the space, casting familiar furniture in unfamiliar shadows. My eyes kept drifting to a framed photograph on the shelf. Linda. The picture had been taken the summer, before she got sick. We were standing out on the porch, paint cans still open at our feet after repainting the house. I had flicked a small drop of paint at her, just to make her laugh. It landed right on the tip of her nose. She laughed so hard the neighbor came outside to see what was going on. For a moment, I could almost hear it again. Linda used to say, "When something doesn't make sense, don't rush to fix it. First, understand it." She had been right about most things. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to call Brian. Not yet. If there was one thing nearly 4 decades in civil engineering had taught me, it was that you never start repairing a structure before understanding why it failed. You study the stress points. You examine the foundation. you trace the damage back to its origin. Otherwise, you just cover cracks instead of fixing them. The next morning, I was back at the bank. Susan greeted me with a sympathetic smile. But there was something else behind it now. Concern. Focus. "We've been reviewing everything," she said. Kevin from Fraud Services joined us again, this time carrying a thicker folder than the day before. He set it down on the table and opened it carefully, spreading several printed pages in front of us. "I think it's best if we go through this chronologically," he said. I nodded. He pointed to the first entry. 8 months ago, your online banking credentials were reset. That didn't surprise me. Brian helped me set that up, I said. Kevin made a small note. The following month, a secondary contact was added to your account. Your son, again. I nodded. Then, 3 weeks later, he flipped to the next page. Transaction alerts were redirected. Redirected where? To your son's phone. I looked up sharply. I stopped receiving fraud alerts? According to these records, yes. I leaned back slowly, letting that settle in. Each individual change sounded small, reasonable, even. But hearing them laid out one after another, something else began to take shape. Kevin continued. 3 months ago, spending limits were modified. I never asked for spending limits. They were lowered. To what? He hesitated, just briefly. $500. For a second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd. I had spent 40 years managing construction projects worth millions of dollars. I had signed off on budgets that could reshape entire neighborhoods. And now, without a single conversation, someone had quietly decided I shouldn't be trusted to spend more than $500 of my own money. Susan spoke gently. Mr. Walker, we found no evidence that funds have been taken. Then what is this? She chose her words carefully. It appears to be increasing control. That phrase stayed with me. Increasing control. Not theft. Not fraud in the traditional sense. Control. Driving home later that morning, pieces of memory began shifting into place in ways they never had before. Thanksgiving. Melissa insisting on paying the restaurant bill before I could even reach for my wallet. You've done enough for this family, she'd said, smiling. At the time, I had taken it as kindness. Now, another detail surfaced. She had asked, almost casually, "Are you still carrying all those credit cards?" That must get confusing. I hadn't thought anything of it. Then Christmas, Brian offering to organize my tax records. Dad, it'll save you the headache. I appreciated the help. Truly, I did. But afterward, he had asked questions. Specific ones. How much do you keep in checking? Any CDs coming due? Have you updated your beneficiaries? At the time, I assumed he was thinking ahead. Now, it felt more like he had been taking inventory. By Thursday afternoon, I found myself sitting in my car outside a law office I hadn't visited in years. Daniel Mercer. He had handled Linda's and my estate planning nearly 15 years earlier. He wasn't flashy. Drove an older SUV. Still kept physical files stacked neatly behind his desk. But he was thorough, careful, the kind of man who earned trust over time rather than asking for it. He looked genuinely surprised when I walked in. "Harold," he said, standing to shake my hand. "It's been a while. I wish this were a social visit." His smile faded. We sat down, and I told him everything. The declined cards, the account changes, the signatures. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. "I want to see every document." The bank already sent copies. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The room remained quiet except for the soft turning of pages. Finally, he set the papers down. Something isn't right. You noticed it too? He nodded. These authorization forms. He tapped one page. They referenced discussions that supposedly took place in my office. They never happened. I know. He looked directly at me. Because I wasn't involved. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had said. Daniel was not a man who exaggerated. If anything, he tended to understate problems. So when he leaned back and spoke quietly, I listened carefully. I think you should proceed very carefully. What do I do? For now? He closed the file. Nothing. I frowned. Nothing? Don't confront your son. Why not? Because when people believe they've succeeded, they stop being careful. He let that sit for a moment. They relax. They stop hiding things. I understood immediately. And if I say nothing, they'll continue exactly as they have been. He leaned forward slightly, and people reveal far more through ordinary behavior than they ever do under pressure. Before I left, he asked a question that seemed unrelated at first. Has anyone mentioned assisted living recently? I froze. Why would you ask that? Just answer the question. I thought about it. A few times. Who? Melissa. How often? I searched my memory. Easter. After church. Again at my granddaughter's birthday. Always casually. I could hear her voice in my head. Wouldn't it be nice? Not worrying about yard work. Imagine having meals prepared for you. You'd have friends your own age. I had always smiled and changed the subject. Daniel nodded slowly. I've seen this pattern before. My stomach tightened. What pattern? Sometimes financial control comes first. He paused. Before larger decisions are made. Like what? He met my eyes. Declaring someone incapable of managing their own affairs. I stared at him. I'm not saying that's what's happening, he added carefully, but it's a possibility. A possibility. Driving home, I took a different route without really thinking about it. At some point, I passed one of the newer retirement communities on the edge of town. Neatly trimmed lawns, white rocking chairs, walking paths winding between buildings. There was nothing wrong with the place. In fact, it looked peaceful. If someone chose to be there. The key word, being chose. Another memory surfaced. About 6 weeks earlier. Melissa had handed me a glossy brochure. I just thought you'd like to take a look. I hadn't even opened it. She had smiled anyway. No pressure. Now I wondered if the pressure had been there all along. Just invisible. By the time I pulled into my driveway, one thought had settled firmly into place. This was no longer about a declined card. It was about something far more unsettling. And for the first time, I began to realize just how much might already be happening without my permission, and how little of it I truly understood. That evening, I drove home by a different route, not because I had planned to, but because my mind was elsewhere, tracing connections that hadn't seemed connected before. The road curved past the edge of town, where newer developments had slowly replaced open land. It was there that I passed one of the retirement communities again. This time, I didn't just glance at it. I slowed down. The place looked peaceful. Neatly trimmed hedges, wide porches lined with white rocking chairs, soft lighting beginning to glow as the sun dipped lower. From a distance, it looked like comfort, safety, simplicity. But standing there in my car, watching it more closely, something about it felt different. Not wrong, just final. A place people arrived when decisions were no longer entirely theirs. The thought stayed with me long after I pulled back onto the road. By the time I reached home, the house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, just still, in a way that made every sound more noticeable. The ticking of the clock in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my steps. I set my keys down on the kitchen table and stood there for a moment, staring at the surface. Linda and I had spent years at that table, balancing checkbooks, helping Brian with homework, planning vacations we weren't sure we could afford at the time. Every scratch in the wood had a memory attached to it, and suddenly I found myself wondering who else had been thinking about that table. Not as a place filled with memories, but as an asset. That night, I didn't turn on the television. Instead, I sat in silence, letting the events of the past 2 days settle into something clearer. Piece by piece, the pattern Daniel had hinted at began to take shape. Control didn't arrive all at once. It arrived quietly. A password change here. A notification redirect there. A helpful suggestion. A small decision made for your own good. Each one easy to accept on its own. Together, something else entirely. The next morning, my phone rang earlier than usual. Daniel. I've been looking into a few things, he said without preamble. What did you find? There are property records tied to your address. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. What about them? Your house itself hasn't been touched, he said carefully. No transfers, no filings. I exhaled, but only slightly. But, he continued, I did find something else. What? He paused, choosing his words. Emails. Emails? Not yours. The silence stretched. I believe your son contacted a real estate agent several weeks ago. The words landed heavier than I expected. What did he say? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He asked what homes in your neighborhood were selling for. I leaned back in my chair, staring at nothing in particular. He can't sell my house. No, Daniel said calmly. He can't. Another pause. But someone planning ahead might still want to know its value. Planning ahead, that phrase echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I remained at the table, my hand resting against the worn wood, tracing one of the faint scratches Linda had always insisted gave it character. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the house. It was about something much harder to accept. Someone I had spent my entire life protecting had quietly begun making decisions about my future. Without me. Later that afternoon, Daniel called again. This time, his tone was different, more serious. I need you to come by first thing Monday. Did you find something else? Yes. What is it? He hesitated. I believe they may already be preparing paperwork that questions your ability to manage your own affairs. For a moment, I said nothing. Outside the kitchen window, the flag Linda had insisted we fly every summer moved gently in the breeze. The fabric caught the light, shifting with each passing gust. It was such a normal sight, ordinary, unchanged. And yet, everything beneath it felt different. For the first time since that morning at the coffee shop, I understood something clearly. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a family disagreement. It was a race. And if I made one wrong move, one careless decision, I could lose far more than access to a bank account. I could lose the right to decide anything at all. Monday morning arrived faster than I expected. Daniel was already waiting when I walked into his office. A yellow legal pad sat in front of him, filled with notes. 2 folders were stacked neatly beside it. A cup of black coffee rested near his hand, untouched, long since gone cold. He closed the door behind me before either of us spoke. I spent the weekend thinking about your situation. I've been doing the same. I imagine you have. He slid one of the folders across the desk toward me. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, he said. But I also don't want you making decisions based on emotion. I nodded. What do you recommend? He leaned back slightly. For now, let them believe exactly what they already believe. I frowned. Meaning that you're unaware. The words sat between us. That feels dishonest. It's strategic. He folded his hands together, his tone calm but firm. If Brian and Melissa think you've figured everything out, they'll become defensive. They'll stop communicating. They'll start explaining things instead of showing them. And if I say nothing, they'll continue behaving naturally. He paused, and people reveal far more through ordinary behavior than they ever do when they're trying to defend themselves. Driving home later that day, I replayed his advice over and over. I had never been much of an actor. Linda used to say she could always tell when I was planning a surprise because I couldn't hide anything from her. Now, I had to hide the biggest discovery of my life. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth. And for the first time, I understood just how much truth might still be hidden beneath everything I thought I already knew. Friday morning, Daniel called again. "I've been digging a little deeper," he said. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place I seem to return to more often these days. "What did you find?" "There are communications between your son and a financial advisor," he replied. "Most of it is routine, general questions, planning discussions." "That doesn't sound unusual." "It wouldn't be," he said, "except for one detail." I waited. One of the messages was copied to the wrong email address. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. "And?" Daniel paused, just for a moment. "I can't go over everything on the phone," he said carefully. "But I can tell you the subject line." There was something about the way he said it that made the silence feel heavier than usual. "What does it say?" He exhaled slowly. "Dad doesn't know yet." The words settled into the room like something physical, something that didn't belong but refused to leave. "Dad doesn't know yet." I repeated them quietly after the call ended. Not because I needed to hear them again, but because I needed to understand what they meant. Not suspected, not unsure. Certain. They believed I didn't know. They believed they were still in control of the situation. For a long moment, I sat there without moving, the phone still in my hand. Then I placed it gently on the table and leaned back in my chair. Maybe they thought I was confused. Maybe they thought I was vulnerable. Maybe they even believed they were doing the right thing. But one thing had become unmistakably clear. They were making plans about my future. As if I no longer needed to be part of the conversation. That afternoon, Brian called. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded normal, relaxed, almost cheerful. "You doing okay?" "I'm managing," I said. "I've been meaning to stop by." "You're welcome anytime." He hesitated briefly. "How about dinner tomorrow?" "Sounds good." There was a small pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "And don't worry about the credit cards," he added. "Everything's under control." Under control. I let the words pass without reacting. "I appreciate you looking out for me," I said evenly. Another pause. Then he laughed softly. "I knew you'd understand." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. The hardest part wasn't pretending. It was hearing my own son mistake. My silence for agreement. The next evening, Brian and Melissa arrived carrying takeout from my favorite Italian place. Melissa hugged me as she stepped inside. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine." "You look a little tired." "I didn't sleep well." She exchanged a quick glance with Brian, subtle but noticeable. "Did you remember to take your blood pressure medication?" she asked. I looked at her. "I've been taking it for 12 years. She smiled lightly. "I know. Just checking." We moved into the kitchen, unpacking containers, setting plates, falling into the kind of routine that used to feel comfortable. The conversation stayed light at first. The grandchildren. School. Groceries getting more expensive. Normal things. Safe things. It wasn't until dessert that the tone shifted. Brian cleared his throat slightly. "Dad." "Yeah?" "I've been thinking." "I imagine you have." He smiled. though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Managing finances can get stressful as we get older. I didn't respond. I just listened. We don't want you worrying about bills or scams, he continued. Melissa reached across the table and rested her hand gently over mine. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, she said softly. Let us take care of you. Her voice sounded sincere, convincing, even. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have believed every word. I looked at both of them. Then I nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. The change in the room was immediate. Relief. Subtle, but unmistakable. Brian leaned back slightly, his shoulders loosening. Melissa's expression softened. Neither of them realized how much that reaction revealed. Over the next couple of weeks, I became exactly what they seemed to expect. Careful, dependent, agreeable. Not because I needed to be, because I wanted to see how far things had already gone. One afternoon, I called Brian. I need to replace my lawnmower, I said. How much is it? Around 600. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough. Maybe you should wait, he said finally. We should talk about it first. Talk about it. As if I were asking permission. Another time, I mentioned taking a short fishing trip with an old coworker. Melissa responded immediately. Do you think that's safe? I almost smiled. I've been fishing for 50 years. I know, she said, still smiling. But accidents happen. Each conversation, taken alone, sounded reasonable, concerned, thoughtful. Together, they pointed in one direction. Smaller choices, fewer decisions, less independence. Daniel had suggested I document everything, so I bought a spiral notebook. Nothing special, just lined paper and a pen. Every conversation went into it. Dates, times, exact wording. Whenever Brian or Melissa made a decision for me without asking, I wrote it down. Whenever they spoke about our plan for my future, I wrote that down too. I started saving everything. Emails, texts, voicemails. There was nothing dramatic about any of it. That was the unsettling part. Control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with force. It arrives quietly, disguised as convenience, as care, as protection. One small step at a time. And by the time you notice it, it already feels normal. By the time June arrived, my life had quietly divided into two separate versions of itself. In one version, nothing had changed. I was still Harold Walker, a retired engineer, a man who mowed his lawn every Thursday morning, attended church on Sundays, and made grilled cheese sandwiches for his grandchildren whenever they asked. The same routines, the same neighbors, the same familiar rhythm. But in the other version, everything had changed. In that world, I was documenting my own life, as if it were evidence. Every conversation, every decision made without me, every small moment that, on its own, could be explained away, but together formed something impossible to ignore. Some mornings, I found it hard to reconcile those two realities. They didn't feel like they belonged to the same person, and yet they did. I kept writing in the notebook, page after page, dates, times, exact wording. There was a strange discipline to it, a kind of quiet focus that reminded me of my years as an engineer. You don't assume, you don't interpret. You record what is actually there. Daniel had been clear about that. We're not building a case against your son, he'd said. We're building a record of the truth. There was a difference. One came from anger. The other required patience. The bank's fraud department continued their review as well. Kevin called every few days, his voice steady, professional. We've identified additional changes to your account, he said during one call. Anything illegal? I asked. We're still determining that. What does that mean? It means intent matters. He explained it carefully. Helping a parent manage finances wasn't illegal. Neither was assisting with online banking or monitoring accounts. The question was whether those actions had crossed a line, whether control had been taken without proper authorization. There are gray areas, he said. But some of these records concern us. What concerns you most? The cumulative pattern. That phrase again. Not one decision. Not one mistake. The pattern. One Saturday morning, I stopped by my favorite hardware store. I had known the owner, Frank Collins, for nearly 20 years. He looked up from stacking boxes and smiled. "Harold, morning. Morning. Haven't seen you in a while. I've been busy." We walked through the aisles together, talking about nothing in particular. Tomatoes. Fertilizer. Whether this year's weather would be good for the garden. Normal conversation. Easy. Then he asked a question that stopped me mid-step. "So, when are you moving?" I turned toward him. "What? I thought Brian said you were downsizing." For a moment, I didn't respond. "He told you that?" Frank shrugged. "Couple weeks ago. Said you were probably selling before winter." I forced a small smile, the kind that keeps conversations from turning uncomfortable. "Nothing's been decided." "Oh." He frowned slightly. "I figured everything was already in motion." "In motion." I nodded, said something non-committal, and finished my purchase. But the words followed me all the way back to the car. Brian wasn't just thinking about changes. He was talking about them, as if they were already decided, without ever asking me. That afternoon, I sat in the driveway longer than usual, the engine off, my hands resting on the steering wheel. The notebook lay on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't reach for it right away, because writing it down would make it real. Eventually, I did. Date, time, exact wording. He assumes agreement. A few days later, something unexpected happened. My neighbor, Judge Walter Henderson, caught me as I was bringing in my trash cans. He had retired from the county probate court several years earlier. He and his wife had lived next door since before Brian was born. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." We sat down on my front porch. He didn't waste time. "I had lunch with Frank Collins." I smiled faintly. "News travels fast. It does in a town like this." He studied me for a moment. "Is everything all right?" I considered giving the usual answer. "Fine. Everything's fine." Instead, I said the truth. "No." He listened as I explained. The cards, the account changes. The conversations. The notebook. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he folded his arms and leaned back slightly. "I saw too many cases like this," he said. "You think Brian is trying to steal from me?" He shook his head. "Maybe. Maybe not. Then what?" He looked at me carefully. "I think good intentions can slowly turn into entitlement." The words settled in the quiet space between us. "I watched families convince themselves they were helping," he continued, "while taking away someone's voice, one decision at a time." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to me. "Evelyn Brooks." I looked down at it. "Who is she?" "The best elder law attorney I ever saw in my courtroom." "I already have, Daniel." "You do?" he said with a small nod. "And Daniel's excellent." He tapped the card lightly. "But Evelyn specializes in one thing." "What's that?" "Protecting competent people from being treated like they aren't." That stayed with me. Protecting competent people from being treated like they aren't. That evening, Daniel called again. This time, there was something different in his voice. Not concern, something closer to urgency. "I think we may have caught a break." "What happened?" "One of the documents your son sent to a financial advisor was misdirected." My pulse quickened slightly. "What did it say?" "I can't go through all of it over the phone," he said. "But there's one part you need to hear." I waited. He didn't rush. Then, slowly, he read the subject line aloud. Dad doesn't know yet. The same words. Again. This time, they didn't feel like a possibility. They felt like confirmation. I sat there in silence after the call ended. The phone still in my hand. They believed I didn't know. They believed everything was still unfolding exactly as they intended. And for the first time since this began, I understood something with complete clarity. If I moved too soon, I would lose the chance to see how far this had already gone. So I did the only thing that made sense. I kept watching. I kept writing. And I let them believe exactly what they already believed. That I had no idea what was happening. That I was simply going along. And somewhere beneath that quiet surface, the truth continued to reveal itself, one small moment at a time. A week later, Daniel called with something different in his voice. Not concern. Not caution. Momentum. I think it's time, he said. For what? To protect yourself. That afternoon, I met with him again, along with Evelyn Brooks. Judge Henderson had been right about her. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't waste words. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, every sentence carried weight. For nearly 3 hours, we went through everything. My will, my accounts, the house, every detail of my life that could be turned into a decision by someone else if I wasn't careful. I don't want to punish Brian, I said at one point. I know, Daniel replied. I still love him. And nothing we're doing changes that. Evelyn nodded slightly. This isn't about punishment, she added. It's about structure. Structure. That word felt right. By the time we finished, something new had taken shape. Not anger. Not revenge. Something steadier than that. A plan. But there was one more step. I want everyone there, I said. Daniel looked up. Everyone? Brian, Melissa, and? You, Evelyn. Susan from the bank. Kevin. He raised an eyebrow. That's quite a gathering. I allowed myself the faintest smile. It won't be a gathering. He understood immediately. No, he said quietly. It won't. I invited Brian for Sunday dinner. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. He sounded genuinely pleased. That'll be nice, he said. It's been a while. I've also invited a few people, I added. Oh? My attorney. There was a pause. Everything okay? Yes. What are we celebrating? I looked out the window as I answered. An important conversation. Sunday arrived slowly. The house felt different that morning. Not tense. Not anxious. Just aware. As if even the walls understood that something significant was about to happen. Brian and Melissa arrived right on time, carrying a homemade apple pie. Melissa smiled warmly. You look great. I feel great. Her eyes drifted toward the dining room. The table had been set more formally than usual. Extra chairs, additional place settings. A small detail, but noticeable. Daniel arrived first. Then Evelyn. A few minutes later, Susan stepped in, followed by Kevin, who carried a slim leather portfolio under his arm. Brian's expression shifted the moment he saw them. Confusion. Melissa's smile tightened slightly. What's going on? Brian asked. I gestured toward the table. Let's sit. No one argued. Chairs moved softly against the floor as everyone took their place. The room grew quiet. Brian glanced around, then back at me, offering a familiar, easy smile. Dad, he said, have you finally decided to let us handle everything? I met his eyes. After weeks of waiting, I answered, yes. The silence that followed felt almost calm. Brian leaned back, relief spreading across his face. I think that's the right decision. I do too. Melissa reached for his hand beneath the table. She thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything now. I'm glad we're finally on the same page, he said. So am I. No one else spoke. Daniel folded his hands. Evelyn watched. Susan and Kevin remained still. No one rushed. No one interrupted. I looked around the table. This room had seen birthdays, holidays, celebrations that filled every corner with noise and laughter. Now, it held something else entirely. Truth. I cleared my throat. Before we eat, I said, I'd like to thank both of you. Melissa smiled. You don't have to. I do. Brian nodded. We're family. I looked directly at him. You've taught me something important. He seemed almost pleased. What's that? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You taught me how easily good intentions can become control. The words settled into the room. Brian's smile faded. I'm not sure I understand. I think you do. I reached beside my chair and lifted a blue binder, placing it gently at the center of the table. No one here is in trouble, I said, but everyone here needs to understand what's happened. Melissa crossed her arms. What is this? The last 8 months, I replied. I opened the binder. The first change happened 8 months ago. I slid the first document forward. The day my online banking credentials were reset. Brian leaned forward. I helped you with that. I know. I turned the page. The next change redirected fraud alerts from my phone to yours. So I could protect you, he said quickly. I believe that, I answered. Another page. Then spending limits were lowered. Melissa spoke before Brian could. That was to reduce risk. Susan's voice entered calmly. Our records show Mr. Walker was never informed of those limits. Melissa turned toward her. We were trying to help. Kevin spoke next, just as evenly. Helping typically involves informing the account owner. The room didn't get louder. It didn't need to. Facts carry their own weight. I continued turning pages. Address changes. Phone number updates. Email replacements. Replacement cards. Each document dated. Each change small on its own. Together. Something else entirely. Melissa leaned forward. You signed authorization forms. I looked at her. No. Kevin opened his portfolio. We've reviewed those documents, he said. Several signatures appear inconsistent with Mr. Walker's historical records. Brian turned sharply. What does that mean? It means we're investigating how those authorizations were obtained. Brian looked at Melissa. What is he talking about? For the first time since she walked in, she didn't answer immediately. Daniel spoke instead. Brian, may I ask you something? He nodded slowly. Did your father ever ask you to change his mailing address? No. Did he request that his credit cards be canceled? No. Did he instruct you to redirect his account notifications? Brian hesitated. No. He looked at Melissa again, confusion replacing certainty. I thought... Daniel waited. You thought what? Brian swallowed. I thought Melissa had discussed everything with Dad. Every eye turned toward her. You told me you had... Brian said. I told you he agreed, she replied. You said you talked to him. I mentioned it. The difference hung in the air. Mentioned. Asked. Agreed. Not the same thing. Silence settled over the table again. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Something quieter. Understanding. Evelyn spoke gently. May I ask you something, Brian? He nodded. When did you first begin to believe your father couldn't manage his own affairs? He looked down. I don't know. Take your time. Several seconds passed. After Mom died, he said quietly. My chest tightened. He seemed different. I was, I said softly. You forgot to return a library book once, he continued. You mixed up a doctor's appointment. I almost smiled. I paid the fine. I know. You asked me how to use online banking. Because it changed, I said. Brian rubbed his forehead. I kept seeing little things. Evelyn nodded. And those little things became… What? He closed his eyes briefly. Evidence. Were they actually evidence? He shook his head. No. What were they? His voice dropped. Assumptions. I stood and walked into the kitchen. For a moment, I just stood there, looking out the window. A cardinal landed on the fence. Linda used to say they were reminders. I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. But I wished she were there. She would have known what to say. When I returned, I carried an old photo album. I opened it to a picture of Brian as a child. You remember this? I asked. He smiled faintly. The Pinewood Derby. You couldn't get the wheels straight, I said. So we stayed in the garage until midnight. You didn't give up, he said. Neither did you. I closed the album. When did you decide I deserved less patience than you did? His eyes filled instantly. Dad. I'm asking. He couldn't answer. Melissa didn't either. Finally, Brian stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. I'm sorry. Just 2 words. No defense. No explanation. I thought I was protecting you, he said, his voice breaking. I know. I never wanted your money. I believe you. I thought if I handled everything, nothing bad could happen. I nodded slowly. Instead, something did. Tears ran freely down his face. Melissa looked at him, stunned. Brian. No, he said, shaking his head. No more. He turned back to me. I should have talked to you. Yes. I should have trusted you. Yes. His voice dropped even further. I stopped seeing you as my father. The room went still. I started seeing you as someone I needed to manage. There it was. The truth. Clear. Unavoidable. Melissa lowered her eyes. I thought efficiency was kindness, she said quietly. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue about. Daniel broke the silence. Harold, he said, there's one final matter. I nodded. I know. I looked at Brian. I've already signed a new estate plan. His face fell. I understand. You haven't heard it yet. I don't deserve anything. This isn't about punishment. I rested my hand on the binder. It's about protection. He looked confused. For who? For everyone, I said. And for the first time that evening, no one in that room was pretending anymore. Dinner that night was almost ordinary. Plates were passed around the table. Someone asked if anyone wanted more green beans. Susan complimented the dinner rolls. Kevin admitted, with a quiet smile, that he had already gone back for seconds before dessert. For a few brief moments, no one mentioned banks, documents, or control. We simply ate. And somehow, that normalcy felt more meaningful than anything that had been said earlier. After the plates were cleared, I stood and poured fresh coffee for everyone. The smell filled the room, familiar and grounding. This time, I allowed myself a small, private smile. No one's card needed to work for this cup. Daniel opened the new estate binder. Harold has asked me to explain the changes, he said. Brian nodded quietly. I'm listening. The previous estate documents have been revoked, Daniel continued. No reaction. No argument. Just attention. Mr. Walker remains in full control of his financial decisions. He glanced toward me briefly, then continued. If, at any point in the future, Mr. Walker is determined to be unable to manage his affairs, that determination cannot be made by a family member. Brian looked up, Who decides? Two independent physicians, Evelyn said. And even then, she added, financial authority transfers to a licensed fiduciary, not to any individual family member. Brian absorbed that slowly. So, no one in the family controls it. Correct. Melissa spoke for the first time in a while. You don't trust us? I answered before anyone else could. No. The word landed harder than anything I had said all evening. Then I continued. I don't trust any one person with unchecked control. I let that sit for a moment. Not you. Not Brian. Not even myself. I looked toward Daniel. That's why we built safeguards. He nodded. Structure, he said. I turned back to Brian. This protects my choices, and it protects you from ever being placed in this position again. He didn't respond immediately, but he understood. I could see it. There's one more thing, I said. I reached for a thinner folder beside my chair. This isn't about inheritance. Brian frowned slightly. What is it? A small charitable fund. Melissa looked surprised. For what? Financial education. Evelyn smiled faintly, as if she had been waiting for that moment. I leaned back, slightly. When you helped me set up online banking, I said. I realized something. Everyone was listening now. A lot of people my age feel embarrassed asking for help. I paused. They shouldn't. The room stayed quiet. I don't want someone else to hand over complete control just because they're afraid of looking foolish. Susan nodded. Our bank would be glad to help with that, Kevin added. So would our fraud prevention team. Daniel smiled. I can explain legal structures, powers of attorney, what they actually mean. I couldn't help but smile. Linda would have liked that. Turning something painful into something useful. That had always been her way. The weeks that followed were not easy. Trust doesn't return because someone says, I'm sorry. It returns slowly, through actions. Brian changed first. Not dramatically, quietly. One Saturday morning, he showed up with a toolbox. I noticed your porch railing is loose, he said. It is. I could fix it. I nodded. You could. He hesitated. Would you like me to? I smiled. I would. That one question made all the difference. Melissa took longer. She didn't call. She wrote. A handwritten letter. She explained that growing up, she had watched her own family struggle when her grandfather lost his independence. Her mother had always said, if we had stepped in sooner, things would have been easier. Melissa had carried that belief forward. Without realizing not every situation is the same, she admitted she had confused preparation with permission, efficiency with kindness, control with care. She didn't ask me to forget. She didn't ask me to excuse it. She simply apologized. That mattered. Summer turned into autumn. The tree in the front yard shifted from green to deep shades of orange and red. The grandchildren returned to school. Life moved forward the way it always does. Quietly, steadily, without asking whether you're ready. One Sunday after church, Brian asked if I wanted breakfast. Just the two of us. We went to the same diner we had visited when he was younger. After the waitress poured coffee, he looked across the table. I miss talking to you. I've been here, I said. I know. He stared into his cup for a moment. I spent months making decisions for you. I noticed. He gave a small, embarrassed smile. I forgot something. What's that? You've been making good decisions your whole life. I reached across the table and rested my hand briefly on his shoulder. We all forget things sometimes. He let out a quiet laugh. I guess I proved that. Almost exactly 1 year later, on another Tuesday morning, I woke up before sunrise. Out of habit, I drove to the same coffee shop. The same one. The same counter. The same quiet rhythm of early morning customers. The cashier looked at me for a moment, then smiled. "I remember you." "I was hoping you wouldn't," I said. She laughed. "The coffee is still $2.89. I'm glad inflation hasn't taken everything." She rang it up. I reached into my wallet, took out my card, and inserted it into the reader. A brief pause. Then a soft beep. Approved. No hesitation. No confusion. Just a simple, ordinary transaction. She handed me the cup. "Have a wonderful day." "You too." As I turned to leave, I heard a voice behind me. "Dad." Brian. He had followed me in. "Let me get that," he said, reaching for his wallet. I shook my head gently. "No." He hesitated. "I've got it." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know you do." I smiled. "But I've got this." He smiled back. Not the confident smile of someone taking charge. Something quieter. Something better. "I know you do, Dad." We stepped outside together into the morning light, not as someone being managed, not as someone doing the managing. Just a father and a son. Learning, perhaps later than we should have, that love without respect slowly turns into control. But love with respect becomes family again. As I drove home, I thought about that small cup of coffee. It had cost $2.89, but it had revealed something far more valuable. Sometimes the smallest moments uncover the biggest truths. Growing older doesn't mean giving up your dignity. Needing help doesn't mean giving up your voice. And if you truly care about someone, you don't quietly take their independence away. You stand beside them. You ask what they need, and you respect the answer.